The Holy Gospel is written in the 14th chapter of St. Luke, beginning at the 25th verse. Now large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned to them and said, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish it, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. At least once a month I sit down and I begin to write. I don't write my sermons usually, but I do write the monthly insertion into your newsletter. And writing is kind of a complex thing. Words have to be weighed, and spelling is important. One of the things quite often that we forget is important in writing is the punctuation. And the reality is, if we aren't careful about our punctuation, we can mean something different with the same words. Now, I saw an example of that not too long ago when I was reading about a wife who was traveling in Florida. Her husband was in New York, and she was seeing some paintings being done. And she got excited about one, and she called her husband and asked if she could go ahead and purchase the painting. And she actually texted him. And he responded with a text, and she went out and bought the picture for a rather high price. And she brought it home. And when she brought it home and she presented it to her husband got extremely angry. And he said, "Why in the world did you buy that? Because I gave you strict orders not to buy it." And she said, "Well, no, you told me to go ahead and buy it. I've got your reply right here on my phone. You said, 'No price is too high.'" And he said, "What I meant is, no, the price is too high." Now keep that in mind, because your life kind of depends upon where you put your punctuation marks, particularly those of you who text. In our text today, some people are following Jesus, and they want to follow him, and they think it's kind of an easy ride. And in this text, Christ gets kind of rough with the language. And so many sermons that I've heard on this particular text get tied up in the hate your mother and hate your husband and hate your kids and give up all your possessions. They get all tied up in stuff like that. And Jesus was kind of painting a broad picture. And what he had to say to them was, if you're going to follow me, you've got to consider the cost. And then you say to yourself, no cost is too high. And if you can't follow, you've got to use the other one. You've got to say, no, the cost is too high. And so that's the question I want you to ponder this morning. What, in response to God's call to you, are you giving back today? Does it have a comma, or have you thrown the comma away. Jesus sees people of people of great worth. And it's so easy for us to lose perspective on that, isn't it? I heard a little incident that came out of World War II. It's kind of a classic now. But there was a sergeant that was out in the field in Europe, and he had been wounded. And his captain came out and rescued him because the medics were all taking care of somebody else. He picked up the man and took him into a shelter. But in the process, he was shot himself. The man who he had rescued, the sergeant, recovered and lived to tell about World War II. But the one who had rescued him had died in the process. After he had been back on the mainland here for a couple of years, the parents of the captain who rescued him said that they wanted to see the person that their son gave their life for. When the man showed up, when the sergeant showed up, he showed up half inebriated. He was kind of crude. He was kind of disrespectful of the way he acted at the table. And he never, in the whole process of the 2 or 3 hours that he was there, made any mention of their son. When he left, the wife was crying. And she said, "How in the world can we be happy about our son giving his life for somebody like that?" The husband was much more gentle. And he said, "You've got to consider the possibility that he might have survivor's guilt. That he felt very uncomfortable about being here because of what we had lost. Be a little gentle." But sometimes, she said, it's so hard. It's so hard to see any value in people. Talking about football season, last week some of us, I guess, were shocked when the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers refused to stand for the national anthem. He said he was protesting because of the way blacks were being treated in America and because of the injustice. Now that the reality is that everybody in this country has a right to protest. But what a lot of us thought, and I guess when I was listening to some of the reports, was how can this man, who is so benefited by what the people do around him, the soldiers, the first responders, the police, and all who protect him, how can he stand up or stand in a national spotlight and not respond to a simple courtesy of this country? Not one of us say that this country is perfect. But how can you support a man who is now representing a team and actually a sport, who refuses to give even the slightest dignity to the nation and the world in which he lives, and look at people who test their lives every day for him and not respond in some kind of signal of honor? But we say, because this is a free country, people can do some outrageous things, sometimes things that we have no time for whatsoever. And yet there is value. And yet there is value, and God loves them, and we should too. It's a hard pill to swallow. But then sometimes we have to look at ourselves and say, how does God tolerate us? But the wonderful message of the gospel is today that God looks at us and declares us as something wonderful and great. But then he tells us, if you're going to live out your potential as a human being, as a Christian, you've got to start understanding what it is that you can look at and say, no cost is too high. It was kind of a cute little illustration that I saw the other day of somebody putting the best construction on a very tough situation. It was a young man who was courting a girl, and he dropped in on her unannounced. This was early in the courtship. She was in the process of doing her hair and teasing her hair, and it was spread out in 1,000 different directions. And as she came to the door, she stood there and was surprised to see him. And not knowing how to respond, she said, "Well, how do you like my hair?" And he, willing to risk it all, said, "It looks like it's about to become something very beautiful." That's the way God looks at us. He looks at us in disheveled ways and says it looks like something is going to be beautiful. There was a young girl, her name was Marie Sklendowski, who sat in a class and listened to a teacher, a physics teacher, talk about the potential that every person has, and that everybody could reach for the stars. And everybody, if they wanted to accomplish something, would have to say to themselves, there's going to be many failures, there's going to be many times that I want to quit, but what will make somebody achieve something great for themselves and for mankind is the ability to say, I won't quit because no price is too high. Her name was Marie. She met a young man by the name of Curie, Pierre Curie. And together they worked on physics, on medicine, on science. Most of their experiments failed. And there were times when they were on the point of bankruptcy where people laughed at them for all their things that they had tried to create that failed. And it got to a point where they were almost willing to give up on special experiments and just go along with what already had been learned. And then they went into the laboratory one night and they saw their little water dishes shining. It was the discovery of radium. And after that, it was one discovery after another, one height that exceeded the last. I think none of you have heard of Bartholomew Giovanni. He was an artist, a teacher, a sculptor, and he never accomplished anything at all, except that he had a student by the name of Michelangelo. One of the things that Giovanni was great at was being a teacher. And one of the things he was really even greater at was encouraging his students to become something extraordinary. Michelangelo said in writing about himself that the greatest lesson that he had ever learned as a student of Giovanni's was he had created a statue that he was really proud of. It was early in his art lessons. And he was so proud of it, and he couldn't hardly wait for Giovanni to come in. When he came in, he showed it to him. What Giovanni did was take a hammer and bust it. Michelangelo stood there horrified. And he said the thing that he remembered most about this class and about this man is the statement he made to him at that point, in which he said, talent is cheap, dedication is costly. If you really want to become great, you can't be excited with this kind of a creation. Now, in today's learning experience, I know that he would have reacted different. He would have tried to say it was so beautiful, but that might have been a stopping point for Michelangelo. Michelangelo was spurred on by the idea that no cost is too high. And that's why we have the Sistine Chapel. Michael Phelps, the second Olympics, set new records. And he felt very proud of himself, very contented. And really he wouldn't have to achieve much else in his life. But he came to the point where he said, the cost is too high. And during the time of the last Olympics, before this last one, just a couple of weeks ago, and this recent one, Michael Phelps showed that he thought it was too costly to continue. He got involved in drug troubles, got in trouble with the police, got in trouble with other people, and then suddenly, again, he took the mantle upon himself and said, no cost is too high. And he changed his life and his training schedule and shed his pounds and did his work. And once again achieved something beyond imagination at the last Olympics. Jesus says everything worthwhile is expensive in terms of personal cost. It takes commitment. Husband and wives want good marriages, but it requires dedication and work, not taking things for granted. Parents want children who are good Christian people, and yet sometimes they don't set the example of life that Jesus wants them to live. Church members want a great church, but sometimes they say, let other people do the work. It's too much work for me. The cost is too high. Dedication is costly. Talent is cheap. Ted Giovanni. Matthew, the disciple, was killed by a sword in Ethiopia. Mark died at the hands of a mob in Alexandria. Luke was hanged on a tree in Greece. The Apostle John was set into exile on the island of Patmos. Thomas died by a sword. James the Less, thrown from the pinnacle of a temple and then kicked to death. Bartholomew filleted alive by a knife. Andrew died at a cross. And Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. We aren't going to probably have these challenges, but we are challenged to give a good portion of our life and understand that if we really are committed Christians, we stand and say, no cost is too high. The call comes to you today. How are you going to involve yourself in the Christian gospel? How are you going to get involved? To the extent that you will be involved is how you will answer that question. Whether you put the comma in or you leave the comma out. Whether it's no, the cost is too high, or no, cost is too high. Amen.